Welcome to Wildflower Weekly with Ashley Adair. I'm Ashley, and I work as an Ag and Natural Resources educator in Montgomery County, Indiana. You may have noticed that the weather's looking quite a bit different this week, and my outfit's quite a bit warmer. It's about 43 degrees cooler this week than it was last week. But we'll take a look at what the wildflowers are doing and see what changes we have compared to last week. Let's walk.
Spring ephemeral growth has slowed down quite a bit this week, but temperatures late last week resulted in the forest floor greening up even more after my walk last Wednesday. For those of you joining us for the first time, this video series has mostly been discussing spring ephemeral wildflowers. A spring ephemeral is a woodland plant that completes its above-ground life cycle in a short period of time, usually between March and June in Indiana. These plants provide many benefits to woodland animals at this time of year, serving as food and nectar sources for insects and larger animals alike. Let's set the scene. We're walking at McCormick Woods, a Purdue-managed property near Purdue's campus. This woods was walked on April 15th this week. The weather was 37 degrees Fahrenheit, a full 43 degrees cooler than it was the week previous, and it was quite cloudy and windy. This property is open to the public for hiking and mountain biking and is partially managed by a local mountain biking organization. In the photo to the left, you can see the south entrance to McCormick Woods, which is adjacent to a golf cart path on the Ackerman-Allen Golf Course at Purdue. The weather was quite a bit different this week compared to last week. After Sunday's high temperature of 64 degrees, temperatures dropped off rapidly, even resulting in an overnight low this past Thursday of 24 degrees, resulting in a freeze warning. Many of the flowers we've typically seen open to pollinators were closed tightly this week. Closing flowers during inclement conditions, like high winds, low temperatures, and rain, is a protective measure to keep fragile flower structures in good condition for when the weather improves. In addition, most pollinators won't be flying around in inclement conditions, so there's not much point in being opened up if no one will come visit. Claytonia virginica is seen here with flowers tightly closed. On the left, on an 80-degree day, trout lily is open and ready to receive pollinators. On the right, April 15th, at 37 degrees, trout lily has completely closed up shop. The petals are tightly closed around the interior flower structures. Just as a reminder, I'm hiking in northwest Tippecanoe County. If you're just as few as 15 miles north or south of me, you could be experiencing different conditions and different stages of plant growth and bloom at this time of year. It's also worth noting that not every spring ephemeral species is found in this woodland. Some species that are common or semi-common in other woods, like bishop's cap and hepatica, are so far not found in McCormick Woods. If you have a species that you're wondering about, please feel free to reach out to me for identification. Contact information can be found in the description of this video. Here's how it works. Each slide has information organized in a particular way. Here is the photo, here is the scientific name, and here is the common name. Below the common name, you'll find some interesting facts about the plant, how it's pollinated, its role in the ecosystem, and other information. We've also added an update in the bottom right corner of some slides to show you what's happening with a flower that we saw last week. This week we have fewer updates since everything has slowed down in growth with the cold temperatures. We're starting off with a new species though. Polygonatum pubescens is a member of the lily family. This species and smooth Solomon seal are commonly found in both high quality and degraded woods, so it tends to be a very common species across the board. This species is attractive to bees and hummingbirds, as well as white-tailed deer who favor the foliage. Hairy Solomon seal has fuzzy hairs, which are mostly found on the underside of the leaf along the leaf veins. Other than this plant is difficult to distinguish from smooth Solomon seal. The flowers start to emerge in pairs, hanging from the stem where the leaves attach. It's not uncommon to find this species cultivated as a shade-loving perennial in the home landscape. Let's check up on Trillium. Most of the trillium that we've been seeing in this woods is prairie trillium, Trillium recurvatum. This is a non-nectar producing species. It only produces pollen, so there's not a lot known about how this plant is pollinated because there are so few insects that visit the flowers. This plant is attractive to white-tailed deer and ants, both of which are thought to distribute the seeds. This plant is in various stages of bloom around McCormick Woods. Notice the unique red flowers shown here. There's some speculation that the coloration of the leaves, the mottling that you can see here, could be a means of camouflage against deer, who will otherwise eat the living heck out of this plant in some areas and end up decimating its population. Let's check up on wild ginger. Wild ginger is popping up in many areas of McCormick Woods. This species is considered highly colonial because it spreads rapidly via rhizomes, or underground stems. These rhizomes have aromatic characteristics similar to the ginger that we cook with, giving it its name. Some individuals are starting to set flowers on this plant. As a reminder, the foliage is toxic, so mammals tend not to browse this species, but insects do favor visiting the flowers. The flowers form at the base, and they're sometimes difficult to see without pulling the leaves back out of the way. In this image, we can see the bud of one of the flowers getting ready to emerge. Next up is a new species, Ranunculus, otherwise known as buttercup. This buttercup is probably a swamp buttercup, but there are several similar buttercups in the Midwest, and it can be difficult to tell them apart in some cases. The foliage on this plant is toxic, but the flowers are attractive to a wide variety of insects, including bees, flies, skippers, and beetles. The bright yellow flower is hard to miss as you're walking along the trail, but the leaves themselves are somewhat inconspicuous. The stems of this plant are hairy, and that makes it difficult to tell some buttercup species apart from each other. Making a positive ID is determined by how long the hairs are, how wet the soil is, and how erect the stems are, but the differences are subtle, so we won't put a species name to this one just yet. Our next new species is Phlox divaricata, otherwise known as wild blue phlox. This plant is an inconspicuous hairy plant at first, but soon it'll produce blooms that are quite attractive and are hard to miss along the trail. This plant is visited by long-tongued pollinators, like certain species of bees, butterflies, skippers, and moths. The flowers it produces are fragrant, and it's a cousin of the ornamental phlox that you might be familiar with that's planted in the home landscape. The flowers on this plant will be a real treat to see in the next couple of weeks. Notice how hairy this plant is at first, and how it almost looks like it won't be producing any flowers at all. In some cases, phlox plants may not produce any flowers on some of its stems, instead favoring the leaves. These leaves are important for producing sugars that eventually get stored in the root and make the plant stronger for next year. We have a weather alert this week. While walking on the trail this week, I got pelted by a little winter weather precipitation called Graupel. This is sometimes known as soft hail or snow pellets. It's a wintry precipitation that forms when tiny, super cooled water droplets collect on snowflakes and then freeze there. Graupel is strong enough to bounce off of surfaces and make a ticking sound as it hits leaves on the forest floor, but it's fragile enough to break apart when handled. Our next new species this week is Uvularia grandiflora, the large flowered bellwort. The name may sound somewhat familiar to you. It sounds like uvula, referring to the little dingly bit that's hanging in your throat. The plant's flower somewhat resembles this because of the way that it droops and dangles in the air. The leaves are perfoliate, meaning that the stem pokes through them, kind of like they've been perforated. This plant can sometimes be confused with Solomon seal when it's immature because of its shape and size. They can look quite similar, so taking a look at the leaves and looking for that perfoliate leaf is an important way to distinguish this plant from Solomon's seal. This member of the lily family produces a yellow flower that's sometimes difficult to see unless you gently handle the plant to expose it. The flower is attractive to bees, and the seeds are distributed by ants, while white-tailed deer enjoy munching on the foliage. This may be one of the first species to disappear in a woods that has an overpopulation of deer because they like it so much. One last species update for the week on Trillium flexipes, the drooping trillium. This trillium is typically larger than the prairie trillium that we see elsewhere in this woods, and it lacks patterned leaves. The flower buds continue to progress and are larger in size than they were last week, and hopefully they will be open by next week if the weather improves. Now it's time for our invasive species update. In the red circle is a multiflora rose plant, and in the blue circle is a bush honeysuckle plant. This image gives you an idea of how much foliage they're capable of putting on, even at a small size and before most of the trees start leafing out. On the right is an example of the light-colored bark that bush honeysuckle plants have. Their bark is conspicuously yellowish tan and is mottled at this age. As they age, the bark becomes even more distinctive, usually showing grooves that follow the direction of the branch as they thicken. For more information about invasive species seen in this episode or previous episodes of Wildflower Weekly, please consult the links shown here. These links can also be found in the description of the video.
Thanks for joining us for this week's Wildflower Weekly. We'll see you next time.
Make sure to look for us on Facebook at Purdue Extension, Montgomery County.